Hey there, it's Mindy, and this is part 4 of my DIY tools series for absolute beginners. This time we're talking about the jigsaw. The jigsaw is a handheld saw with a thin blade that cuts in an up and down motion. This can accommodate blades for different materials like wood, plywood, plastics, and even thin sheet metal. This saw is best for cutting shapes and curves, which wouldn't be possible with a circular type of saw. So let's talk more about the jigsaw. So first I'll note this is a battery-powered jigsaw, which I highly recommend because this is constantly moving. You really don't want to be tied to a cord. The switch trigger is right on the handle here. So start and stop. This can be used two ways. You can hold it down the entire time you're cutting, or there's also a locking function where you can press the trigger, lock it on, and just let go and allow yourself to guide the cut. As far as cutting goes, this type of saw is a variable speed, so you control that here more and less, and that's going to depend on the type of material you're cutting. So for example, when you're cutting thin sheet metal, it's going to require a lower speed. Then there's the base plate, which acts like a fence on any other saw, and that's going to keep it straight on your cutting surface. This particular saw has a toolless blade clamp. So this knob here just clicks open and you can change out the blades. This is a T-shank blade, which I'll get to in a second, but it just sits right in this groove for the clamp. And once it's in there, just release it and it's locked in place. That's very important for the blade to be secured. As far as the blade itself, I mentioned that this is a T-shank, which is just the part of the blade that locks into place. Older models may use a different type of shank, but that'll be in your manual. These are easier because they just slide in and out of the clamp. One important term to know about the jigsaw blades is TPI, and that just stands for teeth per inch. You can see here I have a pack with different types of blades. This one's meant for metal. This is basic wood cutting, clean wood cutting, and speed wood. And you're going to choose a blade based on the type of material that you're cutting. But in general, the more delicate the material, the higher number of teeth per inch you'll want to use. So for example, when making curved cuts in wood, you'll want to use higher teeth per inch, and that will produce a smoother cut. Don't worry, you won't need to memorize any of that. The package that the blade comes in will tell you exactly what it's recommended for, as well as your manual will have those settings listed out for you. This knob right here is for orbital mode, and this is a feature that makes the cutting faster when the blade is coming up. That being said, the faster the setting, the rougher the cut will be. So if we're trying to cut curves, we want to use minimal orbit, but a higher speed, and that will produce a cleaner finish. With a jigsaw, you can also do a bevel cut. With this one, there's a locking feature here that just tilts the base plate to a 45-degree angle so that you can cut that way. The only thing to note here is that any other angle besides a 45-degree, you will need to use a protractor to see where the angle is. A couple things to keep in mind with the jigsaw. One is that cutting at low speeds for a long period of time can overheat the saw. So if that does happen, you'll want to turn it off and let it cool down. Also, never force the saw to cut through. This is with all saws. You should be guiding the cut while allowing the saw to keep cutting through whatever material you're cutting. So before I show you some example cuts with the jigsaw, just a couple more things to keep in mind when using it. Unlike other saws where you start and go to full speed before you make your cut, with the jigsaw that can cause tear out when you start. So you may want to just start at a lower speed, then you can lock your trigger on and adjust until you get to the speed that you want for the material you're cutting. Another thing is you always want to clamp your workpiece when you're cutting. This causes a lot of vibration, so you don't want that piece shifting when you're making your cut. And when you're making a straight cut, you'll always want to use a straight edge. As you can see, this base plate is not very wide and it can kind of go sideways, so using a straight edge will help guide your cut. So here are just a couple of example cuts with the jigsaw. This one was on max orbit, highest speed, and used a 7 TPI blade. So you can see how rough that is there. As opposed to this one, which was actually 0 orbit, mid speed and 10 TPI, and so much smoother. I also wanted to show you a curved cut in plywood. So I did not use the orbit for this one. This was on maximum speed using a 10 TPI blade. And here is the cut. I did have some resistance here because of the speed, but overall it's a pretty smooth cut. The edges aren't too bad, but this side I used a higher TPI blade and a lower speed, and you can see there's not really a transition there. It was a smoother cut. So feel free to test out different blades and different materials, adjust your speed settings, try the orbit, see what works best for you. Quick recap on the jigsaw. It's a manual saw with a thin blade that cuts up and down. You can make angled cuts and cut different materials with different types of blades, but mainly we're going to use this for curved and irregular cuts. Of course, don't forget your safety. Use your eye protection, hearing protection, and refer to your manual for any of those adjustments and safety rules for your particular saw.